All right, welcome to The Explainer. In any real estate deal, there's one huge question you have to ask yourself. Who is actually on my side? It's not always who you think, so let's break down how you can know for sure.
I mean, think about it. You walk into an open house. The agent is super friendly, super helpful, and feels like they're working with you. But are they working for you? And that, right there, that confusion, that's what we're going to untangle today. Getting this wrong can really cost you. You might share something that completely tanks your negotiating power. But hey, the good news is, this isn't the Wild West. Texas law actually has very specific rules in place to protect you and make everything crystal clear.
Okay, so this whole protection thing, it kicks in right from the get-go. Texas law says agents have to tell you who they represent. And believe me, the timing is everything. That disclosure has to happen at the very first point of any real contact.
So here's the official rule, straight from the Texas Real Estate License Act, or TRELA for short. It's called representation disclosure. And let's be clear, this isn't a friendly suggestion, it's the law. The minute you have that first contact with an agent about a property, they are legally required to tell you who they work for.
All right, to really break this down, the law points to two key moments. First, there's that initial first contact we just talked about. But then there's a second one called the first substantive dialogue, which we're going to get into. Each one triggers its own specific type of disclosure.
So what does that actually sound like in the real world? Well, here's a perfect example. You call an agent about a specific house, and their response should be this simple, this direct. Boom, just like that. No confusion, no gray area. You know immediately they're on the seller's team.
Okay, so that's first contact. Simple enough, right? But what happens when things start to get a little more serious? That's when a specific form enters the picture, and understanding this form is basically your cheat sheet for the entire relationship.
And this, right here, is the trigger. The moment the conversation shifts from general questions to specifics about you, your money, what you need, your real interest in a specific house, that's when you've officially crossed over into what the law calls a substantive dialogue. And at this point, a more formal disclosure is required.
So the second you cross that line, the agent needs to give you a document called the Information About Brokerage Services, or IABS. The whole point of this form is to get you up to speed on how all this works before you say another word.
Now, when an agent is officially on your team, they owe you some pretty serious duties by law. As you can see here, they have to put your interests above everyone else's, even their own. It's a whole different level of care, but it's also balanced with this core duty to be honest and fair with everyone involved.
Okay, so here's the bottom line, the thing you absolutely have to remember. An agent's loyalty determines where information goes. If they work for the seller, anything you tell them, like the highest price you're willing to pay, they have to tell the seller. Same thing in reverse, and that is why it is so important to know whose side they're on from the very beginning.
All right, now that you've got a handle on an agent's duties, you should know that different real estate companies, well, they play by different rules. How the brokerage itself is set up can actually define how they handle representation from the start. Generally speaking, you're going to see firms fit into one of three buckets. Some companies only represent sellers, others only represent buyers, but a lot of them operate as an intermediary, which means they can actually represent both the buyer and the seller in the very same deal.
Now, this intermediary role, this is where things can get a little tricky. The broker is basically a neutral referee for an in-house deal. They can't give advice or opinions that help one side more than the other. And, get this because it's super important, they have to get written permission from both the buyer and the seller to do it.
So, let's look at the upside. Each of these models has its own clear advantages. A firm that only reps one side totally avoids any potential conflict of interest. On the other hand, an intermediary firm can handle a deal in-house, which can feel a lot simpler for some clients.
But, of course, there's always a flip side, right? There are definitely trade-offs. The single agency firms are, by their very nature, limiting their business to one side of the transaction. And for the intermediary firms, that broker has to walk a really fine line of being neutral, which can make negotiating pretty tough. Not to mention, the paperwork has to be absolutely perfect.
Okay, you know the rules now, so let's talk about what happens when they get broken. Honestly, knowing the common mistakes that agents make is probably the best defense you have to make sure you're being treated the right way.
And this brings us to, without a doubt, the biggest problem we see. It's not usually that agents don't make the disclosure at all, it's that they do it way too late. It all comes down to timing, because if that disclosure comes late,
what's the point? It completely defeats the purpose of the law.
So, what should you be looking for? Here are the big red flags. If an agent gives you that IBS form for the very first time while you're sitting down to write an offer, they're way too late. You should have had that information long before then. Any of these things are a sign that the rules weren't followed correctly.
So at the end of the day, why does any of this really matter? Because knowing these rules is what protects your rights and the final outcome of what's probably one of the biggest financial decisions you'll ever make.
The thing is, people are more informed today than ever before. They get that agents have these serious duties, and they're way more willing to take action if those duties aren't met. These rules aren't just suggestions on a piece of paper. They've got real legal teeth.
You know, this quote really just says it all. A professional agent has to understand these rules. It is the absolute bedrock of their profession. Getting this wrong isn't just a tiny slip-up. It means they failed at the most basic part of their job.
So we'll leave you with this thought. Now that you know the rules of the game, when they have to tell you what it should look like and what your rights are, you're in the driver's seat. The next time you walk into an open house, you'll know exactly what to listen for.